In the heart of Transylvania, among winding paths and foggy forests, stood a castle that rose like a dark ruler over the surrounding landscape. Count Dracula, a figure shrouded in mystery and terror, was more than a myth. He was a symbol of unwavering power and immortality. Yet his story begins long before the towers of his castle rose above the ground, in a time when history was written in blood. Vlad III, known as Vlad the Impaler, was born in 1431 in Sighisoara, in the heart of what is today Romania. His father, Vlad II Dracula, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order founded with the goal of defending Christianity and opposing the Ottoman Empire. From an early age, young Vlad learned the art of war and the political games that would shape his destiny. He quickly set his sights on the thorny path to power, fighting not only external enemies, but also betrayal within his own ranks. Vlad's reign was marked by strict, often brutal measures against his enemies, earning him the nickname Tepes, the Impaler. His cruelty was both a message and a means of preserving power, creating legends that would grow and evolve through the centuries. In the deep, unfathomable forests of Transylvania, where stories and reality intertwine in an eternal dance, a legend began to weave that would captivate the world. In the darkness, where daylight barely penetrated through the dense canopies, people whispered about Vlad's exploits, about his mercilessness that knew no bounds. Under the grey, restless skies of Eastern Europe, the land was soaked in blood and tears. Vlad Tepes, a ruler whose wrath was matched only by his determination, stood as the last bastion against the Ottoman invasion. His kingdom, surrounded by enemies coveting land and power, was the scene of relentless conflict. Vlad, also known as Tepes the Impaler, did not hesitate to use cruelty as a weapon, to bring misery to even the bravest among his enemies. His tactic of impalement became his signature, a fearsome method by which he showed what awaited those who dared to challenge his rule. The fields around his fortresses were scattered with stakes on which enemies were impaled, their bodies twisted in agony even after death. The air was filled with the scent of death, while crows were offered meals of flesh stretched on the tree of suffering. This horrific scene served as a warning to all who attempted to cross Vlad's land with the intention of conquest. But, as these tales of cruelty spread, something darker and deeper began to weave into the folk legends. The story of Vlad Tepes crossed the boundaries of human cruelty, transforming into the myth of a man who became more than a mortal. In the whispers among the peasants, in the fear that crept into people's hearts during the night, Vlad became a vampire, an eternal predator that ruled the night, whose thirst for blood could not be quenched. In this atmosphere of fear and admiration, Bram Stoker, far from the land that birthed this legend, found inspiration for his Count Dracula. His novel, published in 1897, was not just a work of horror literature. It was a catalyst that turned the legend of Vlad Tepes into an immortal myth. Stoker's Dracula was a being that transcended the boundaries of death, a ruler of darkness who carried within him the essence of Vlad's cruelty and ruthlessness, but also something more: immortality and power that evoked both fear and fascination. In Stoker's imagination, Vlad Tepes, the eternal ruler of Transylvania, became Count Dracula, whose story of power, fear, and immortality was told with passion and detail that provided readers insight into the depths of human imagination and terror. Thus, a legend was born that will live forever in the hearts and minds, the legend of Count Dracula, which surpassed the mortal man and became part of the world's heritage, an eternal narrative of the battle between light and darkness, life and death. When Bram Stoker, at the end of the 19th century, put pen to paper, he could not have foreseen how his work, Dracula, would fundamentally change the course of world literature, film, and popular culture. In the darkness of his study, with the light flickering from candles, Stoker wove a dark tapestry that would bring to life a character whose shadow stretches through the centuries. His novel, filled with fear, desire, and immortality, quickly surpassed the confines of literature, becoming the foundation on which the empire of horror was built. Dracula was not just a story about a vampire. It was a meditation on the nature of evil, on the limits of human endurance, and on the deep, dark desires hidden within us all. Stoker's Count Dracula was a being of extraordinary complexity, an aristocrat whose refinement was in terrible contrast with his monstrosity. In him, despair and elegance, passion and terror were intertwined as he watched over the endless night from his castle atop a rocky cliff. This book laid the groundwork for countless adaptations that followed. Movies, television series, theater productions, and even video games plunged into Stoker's vision, each time resurrecting Dracula in a new light, but always retaining the essence of what makes him eternally fascinating, his struggle between humanity and monstrosity. In film, from the silent days to modern blockbuster spectacles, Dracula was depicted in shades that varied from a terrifying predator to a tragic anti-hero. Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee, Gary Oldman, each of these actors gave their unique interpretation of the Count, simultaneously paying tribute and expanding the boundaries of a character that Stoker could never have imagined. Television, too, embraced the dark allure of Dracula, exploring his endless reincarnations through series that ranged from horror dramas to sitcoms, demonstrating his adaptability and eternal appeal. Even in video games, Dracula rises as an enemy to be defeated, but also as a character whose complexity and depth evoke admiration and empathy. But perhaps the most significant impact of Count Dracula on art is his ability to repeatedly question our nature. Through every adaptation, through every interpretation, Dracula forces us to confront our own dark sides, the fears that lurk in the depths of our souls. His eternal search for love, for redemption, even within his monstrosity, resonates in the hearts of those who observe him, awakening empathy even when we should feel only fear. Artistic interpretations of Dracula often portray him as a being trapped between worlds, eternally searching for a place in a world that fears and despises him. This is what makes him so irresistibly attractive. His complexity, his ability to be both monster and victim, makes him one of the most enduring symbols in the world of art. Through pages, screens, and digital worlds, Count Dracula remains an eternal symbol of our fascination with the dark, a reminder that the deepest truths about ourselves often lie hidden in the depths of fear. Atop steep cliffs, where the forests of Transylvania merge with the sky, Bran Castle rises as a dark silhouette against the descending twilight. This ancient castle, with its tall towers and walls radiating history, stands as a witness to a time when the boundaries between worlds were as thin as spiderwebs. Though historically not the home of Vlad the Impaler, legends have firmly linked it with the name Dracula, turning it into a symbol of the eternal struggle between light and darkness, between life and death. The fog that often envelops the castle gives it an aura of mystery, making it a place where reality and myths intertwine in a quiet symphony of the whispering wind. The corridors of Bran Castle, narrow and winding, echo with the steps of visitors, but also with the whispers of those who once walked them, whose deeds are woven into the very foundation stones of this fortress. At night, when the last visitors withdraw and the lights in the distance become only silent witnesses, Bran Castle reveals its true face. Then, among the shadows that dance on the walls under the moonlight, one can feel the presence of something ancient, something lurking from the depths of history. Stories of vampires, of Count Dracula, come to life at that moment, spreading through the cracks of the old walls, whispering of past times when blood was a currency of power. While the legend of Count Dracula occupied a central place in vampire narratives, Eastern Europe was rich in stories that pulsed through the dark veins of its lands, whispered in fear of the invisible terror that lurked in the night. Among these stories, Serbia and its vampire legends hold a special place, with roots that can be traced deep into the past, to a time when people struggled to explain unexplainable events with death returning to claim the living. In Serbia, vampires were not just stories to scare children. They were a real threat, beings considered responsible for a series of misfortunes, from diseases to sudden deaths. The story of Petar Blagojevic, a peasant who returned from the dead to terrorize his village, became one of the first documented vampire stories in Europe, firmly woven into Serbian folklore. These stories, full of dark magic and inexplicable events, represented an attempt by people to make sense of the world around them, a world in which the line between life and death was thin and easily crossed. To the north, in the shadows stretching through areas that today belong to Slovakia and Hungary, another vampiress walked the land. But her story was intertwined with the blood of the innocent. Elizabeth Bathory, born into a noble family, became known as one of the most notorious figures in history, accused of killing hundreds of girls. Legends say she believed that bathing in the blood of her victims would maintain her youth and beauty, which in folk stories turned her into a vampiress, a witch who used blood to feed her immortality. Elizabeth Bathory, often called the Blood Countess, was confined in her Kakche castle, where she spent the last days of her life, surrounded by walls that could not hide the horrors that occurred behind them. Her story, which is perhaps more a reflection of a patriarchal society and fear of powerful women than of true guilt, has remained etched in history as a dark reminder of how dark human imagination can be. In the whirlwind of time, where past and present intertwine in an endless dance, the legend of Count Dracula remains unchanged, an eternal symbol that rises above the transience of life. His story, carved into the foundations of history, continues to pulse through the centuries, defying the limitations of death and oblivion. Dracula, as the eternal ruler over the realm of night, continues to terrify and inspire, whispering in the shadow, reminding us of what lies beneath the surface of our reality. As the world changes, so does the story of Dracula, taking on new forms, adapting to the fears and fascinations of new generations. He's not just a character from the distant past, he is a mirror reflecting our deepest fears and desires, the personification of the darkness that lurks within each of us. In modern culture, Dracula appears in all forms, from terrifying stories by the fire to complex characters on the big screens, each time reshaped, but always recognizable. But what makes Dracula so enduring, so eternally appealing and frightening? Perhaps it is his ability to be reborn from his ashes, to adapt and survive, just as he does through the ages. Or it is his complexity, his humanity battling with monstrosity, offering us insight into our own struggle with the darkness that lurks in the depths of our souls. The story of Dracula is more than a story about a vampire. It is a story about immortality, about the desire to transcend the boundaries of death and to rule forever. In his tale, our own aspirations are reflected, our fears of the unknown, and our fascination with what lies beyond the possible. Dracula, in all his darkness and light, symbolizes the eternal struggle between life and death, good and evil, love and revenge. In the depths of the night, when silence becomes almost tangible, the legend of Count Dracula comes to life, rustling among the shadows, shifting the boundaries of our reality. He is there, an eternal companion in our thoughts, a reminder that some stories never die. They just wait for the right moment to be reborn, illuminating our world with their dark light. Through the centuries, the story of Dracula will continue to live on, through movies, series, novels, and tales. It is a testament to the power of story, the ability to bridge time and space, to touch the hearts and minds of people regardless of time or place. Count Dracula, in his eternal life, remains not only a symbol of fear and fascination, but also a reminder that the most powerful legends are those that never die, forever living in the fabric of our collective imagination.